Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good evening and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. This is Friday, the 4th of April. And tonight we're going to talk about why student voice matters in the AI classroom. And in this episode, I'm joined by the brilliant Emma Darcy, the Director of Technology for Learning at Denby High School, an award-winning digital strategist and a leading voice into the intersection of AI and education. With over 2 decades of experience, Emma has shaped digital strategy for schools and trusts around the UK, won both national and global recognition, and has helped shape future-facing education policy. Tonight, we're going to explore what AI means for students, teachers, curriculum itself, from the ethics to the automation to the skills that really matter. So, welcome, Emma, and thank you for joining us. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for such a lovely build-up as well. I hope I can I can live up to that.
I'm sure you can. Now, I know it is for you and for many of our listeners tonight, the last night before Easter holidays. I still have another
Yes.
week, so please don't rub it in too much.
I'll try not to. I will try not to.
But let's get going into, because I know when we get going and when we've had these conversations before, we will go off into tangents. We will go into lots of different things. And if you are listening on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitter, please feel free to put messages in. We can see them this end and we will respond and go through those as we go live through this episode tonight. But what I really want to know is what your passion and purpose and why you got really into AI and why it really interests you to start off with, and almost, yeah, the reason of why. Why do you think it's a really exciting element to look at now and just not a fad that we should leave in a cupboard and leave alone?
Yeah, why have I spent so much time on it over the last couple of years? I think it was a really good question. And when you sort of sent me this, I thought, okay, let's really think about what was it. And I think, like most people, 2.5 years ago, I became really aware of ChatGPT. You know, when that came out, when people started talking about it, when there was like kind of like, oh my gosh, you know, there's this amazing new tool who does this and da, da, da. And so I sort of had that interest in it at that point from a basic level, I suppose. Just, is this another sort of tool? Let's see what this is going to do. Let's see how this develops. But then I think what really changed my thinking and made me go, oh my goodness, no, this is something really different, was, and I went back and I checked the date. It was the 18th of May, 2023. And I went to Epsom College for the first AI in Education conference. And I look back on that and I look back on like who the lineup was, who was speaking. And it was like a dream lineup that you probably never get anywhere else now. And it was people like Professor Rose Luckin, it was Dan Fitzpatrick, it was introduced by Sir Anthony Selden. There was this chap no one had heard of called Chris Goodall, who was talking about what he was doing with his students. And it was genuinely one of the best conferences I've ever been to, because every speaker, one after the other, said something that absolutely blew your mind when it came to AI. And I only went to the conference in the first place because my head teacher said, "Oh, you've been talking a bit about AI lately. I think you should go to this." But after that conference, I came back and I said, "We've really got to have a different kind of conversation, because this is going to be huge. This is going to transform everything. We need to be ready. We need to be having the conversations in school and with staff and with our students and things." And that was what it was really. And obviously, a lot of the people that I first sort of encountered at that conference, I subsequently engaged with on LinkedIn, followed what they're doing, kept an eye on developments and things. But that was the point. That was the point where I went, right, yeah, this is, I get this now. I understand why this is going to be so important.
And it's that catalyst, isn't it? It's finding that one or two things that people spark and you see, actually, okay, that could change. And it's not one of these fads that will come in. We've had this all the time for education, haven't we? Whether it's Brain Gym or whether it's something else, it comes in, it looks really nice, it looks great, but actually that was the catalyst on that 18th of May for you to really spark
Yeah.
that conversation. So what are the things then that you use AI for that you thought, actually, that is a game changer, abbreviated almost, but because we use that phrase so much. But what are the things that you have found recently, or even then, you realize, actually, there's something different here. There's something that I should pay attention to.
I think it was something that Chris Goodall said, because his session was very much talking about students and the relationship that his students were already developing with AI, and that was something I hadn't even thought of at that point, and that's massively shaped everything I've sort of done and thought about since. But in terms of how I use it, it was almost that thing of like, rather than treating it like a technology tool, using it like, and I'm going to say this very, very cautiously, like a critical friend. And by friend, I want to remove any kind of human element here, any kind of suggestion that in AI in any way is your friend and should be treated as such, but as something that can critically analyze your thinking in a way that is non-judgmental, not bringing anything else to the table that it knows about you and, things you've done in the past. So, for example, one of the things I'll do is I'll use it to check my thinking. If I'm planning something out, if I'm thinking of doing something, if I'm thinking of writing something, I'll pop it into AI, and for me, often it's like Gemini or Notebook LM, and I'll just say, how could this be improved? I'll use it for things like, if I'm writing something and I know I'm maybe bringing a bit too much emotion to the table with what I'm writing, and actually it just needs to be something very objective. I will get it to say, can you write this tonally in a way that is less emotional? What I never use it for is work that I write myself and that I present to people as original blog. So, when I write a blog or a written piece or something like that, I always make sure that is genuinely me. But again, other things I use it for is design work. I am not a naturally gifted graphic designer. I know you've spoken to Trudy previously, who is amazing at all this sort of thing. I'm the exact opposite of that. I'm not very creative at all. So I use AI to help me visualize concepts and ideas and things that I have. So, create me a logo, create me an image that features this and this, and that's something that I find really, really powerful. And seeing the difference that it makes when you put in different descriptive text. And then the other main thing that I think I use it for is sometimes helping me get a bit more organized as well. I mean, I know people say that, when they first start using it and they treat it a bit like Google and then they don't get a result out of it like Google, it's disappointing. But I will use it to help me structure and organize things. So even things like, and I know it's not from an education focus, like planning me a menu for the week and then going, okay, what ingredients do I need to buy? Supporting with planning a holiday, something like that. So it's the not just using it for work, but also actually using it to save me a bit of time in my life and my world away from work as well. And I think that's another reason why I've kind of embraced it quite fully, because there's just so many applications and so many ways in which you can use it.
And it's that exploration, isn't it? We don't know where it fits in nicely
Yeah.
or what it can do, and actually exploring it in terms of checking your thinking, creativity, and organizing is a really good way. I want to go back to that checking the thinking because we were implementing a one-to-one advice scheme, and one of our concerns through just discussions was how is this going to land with parents? What are their
Yeah.
thought processes behind it? How are they going to think? And we were all educators, we were all leaders, we had some teachers on the panel. But before we go and met with some of the stakeholders, I put all our thought processes in and I did like the 16 personality types. And I was like, okay, can you respond with all of these 16 personality types? This is how I think they're going to respond and do that. And it was a really good objective way just to check our own thinking. And that gave me enough foundation of knowledge and opened my mind before I went into those conversations with parents and talked to a small group before we even went up to a bigger group. But it's that thought process, isn't it? And I know Trudy, in our last episode, I talked to her last month about creativity. She said it's a thinking partner, and it is
Yeah.
that. It's a really interesting
That's a
realm,
great
isn't it?
term. Yeah, I really like that term, because I think it's that element of using it. I mean, I freely admit to people that quite often when I will sort of use AI will be later in the day, perhaps when I know that my
Mhm.
brain's a bit more tired, perhaps when I'm coming to that job on my to-do list that I know I've left to the end of the day because it's probably one of my least favorites. And it's like, how do I start this? How do I start this email? How do I start this letter? How do I start approaching this plan? And almost using it to support you with getting started, or almost putting a fresh, dispassionate pair of eyes onto something. And as you were just saying about the thing like with parents, um, you obviously still do the thing of getting parents together, talking to parents, but as soon as you do that, you know some of those parents, you've got a previous experience with them. You're going to bring some of that to whatever they say and to whatever feedback they give you. And I quite like the fact that you can use AI to take that emotion and that preconception out of things. So we talk a lot about the bias that is within AI. I like the fact that we can use it sometimes to remove some of our own biases in terms of what we're trying to do as humans.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about often when we introduce this to new teachers, you think you put one prompt in, the output, that's it. But where we're talking about it is that iterative approach, where actually we're
Yeah.
talking back and forwards, we're having some interesting dialogue with it. And if you think about the imagery stuff that's coming out at the moment, I've just seen an example on LinkedIn earlier today about Midjourney and the conversation that you can have with it and the imagery it can create is absolutely phenomenal, but it's still not just one prompt. It's going back and forwards. And I was talking to Neil Almond as well recently, where he was designing his garden, and he's like, "Here are 4 options," and it's a process. And I think our interaction with AI has already changed since it's come in massively. Where how do you think that interaction has changed for you, considering how you used it probably at the beginning, and then how you're using it now?
I think it probably comes from that place of the more that it's been the more that I've used it, and I think one of the things that's really important is obviously if you're doing anything that involves teaching students or children about AI, you've got to be using AI, you've got to be allowing them to experience AI in some way, shape, or form. And I think in the way in which my relationships changed with it is to begin with, um, it was very much, I think, coming at it from the point of view of okay, what can it do? How are the students going to use it? What's the worry there? What's what that sort of side of things. Whereas now I feel much more confident in the now that there's a little bit of water under the bridge in terms of how people are using it, actually having conversations with people going around things like actually it can support the development of really rich language. It comes, these are large language models. This comes back to what we're saying, what we're writing, what we're putting into them. There is a huge opportunity here to develop literacy, oracy through the use of these tools. And I think I probably feel more confident in talking about that now. I think the other thing as well is there's that challenge, isn't there, about what do we mean by creativity? What should be done by you on your own as a creative person, and what is still creativity if it's done through a verbal prompt or a written prompt into an LLM? Is that still creativity in the same way? And I think there's just been some really interesting conversations about that. And I think it's also as well now there doesn't have to be a definitive answer with any of this about what that should look like, because it's a constantly evolving medium. And again, I suppose my relationship with it has been very much that if you're working in schools, you want to have fixed set answers to things, don't you? You want to know what's right. You want to know how things should be done. You're very used to sort of, processes that perhaps haven't changed over a period of time. And of course, AI just throws that out the water because it's a constantly shifting and evolving thing. So you can't say, oh, yes, and this is how you must use it, and you must not use it for that at any point, within reason, obviously. It just doesn't work in that way, does it? And that those whole ongoing conversations. But I always think about, when ChatGPT first came out, and there wasn't image generation, there wasn't any of this, and now all of a sudden you can do that with it. It's that ongoing conversation that needs to evolve over time.
And it's that ongoing that even the AI companies, yes, they're saying they don't know how sometimes these new models react, but they don't even tell us when a model changes. It's like often it's you go on LinkedIn, someone's like, oh, or Twitter or anything, and you say, oh yeah, I've just noticed this today, and that cascades. Like the prompts change all the time, or how you interact, or whether a mega prompt is actually the right interaction now. It may be completely different in 6 months' time. So whenever you're doing this training to start off, it's I often talk about, and I know we probably get onto this, is about having a principled approach to it
Yeah.
and having that will fit along everything you do and what you say, and these things will fit alongside it. And I think it's where does AI fit within us and within how we work as well. And I think that's probably going to be a key element of our conversation as we go through. But what I want to say is actually Teachers Talk Radio wouldn't be possible without some of our people who are helping us in the background and our sponsors. We've got Kielo. They are a BET awarding 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. Students can instantly and simultaneously create interactive map of discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kielo to make a world a more thoughtful place. So please join them at Kielo, KIALO-edu.com. But also, this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Education Publishers, our professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore your full range of titles. And use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. That's JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. I definitely need to do that because the amount of books I get. I'm one of those people that, yes, I'm really into tech, but I often have books or I have Kindle, and it's however I'm feeling in that. And I know I've got a brilliant podcast coming up in a couple of weeks' time with another one of our co-hosts, with Bruce Robinson, about his book all about questioning, which I'm really looking forward to. So let's think about the world that we live in at the moment and the fact that adolescents from Netflix, and there's been a big push on whether mobile phones in school and how the algorithms are coming through at the moment with social media and what countries are doing. Do you think there is a disconnect between what we're looking at as educators, what's actually happening online and social media, or the more or how the media portray it, and actually what is life and reality?
Yes. Next question. No, I'm sorry. I will.
Yeah, to be fair, I set you up for that, didn't I?
I will completely elaborate on that. I think 100%. I think what we're seeing a lot at the moment is a very reactionary response from us as adults to what we're seeing happening in the world for our young people, and we're trying to support them and guide them in the way that we've always been able to traditionally, but this is shoving all of us out massively out far out of our comfort zone. And I think one of the things that was really good about adolescence is the fact that it has provoked so much conversation in schools. It has I know certainly where our, the conversations around how much about what young people are doing do we still not know? Do we not understand? How much of this is going on behind the radar? Obviously, it's provoked conversations around social media and the influence of social media on our young people, and that obviously is still something that is that needs a lot more work, and that influence. But again, I'm a big believer in the thing of I know the conversation around banning phones has been so prevalent. As far as I'm concerned, we've always had a ban on phones in school. We don't, the children are not allowed to bring their phones. They don't use their phones in lessons. They're not allowed to use their phones anywhere around school. That sort of thing. Phones have to stay well hidden in their bags, and if they come out, we will confiscate them, sort of thing. But the whole thing about almost like if you take the phone away and say, right, a child is not going to have any engagement with a phone at any point in their day, that's going to solve the problem. And of course, it's not. And my concern about a number of these things where it's bans is, yes, you are removing them from what we're seeing as an area of risk, but at some point they're going to come across it, and at some point they're going to have to engage with it. And are we actually setting them up to fail then? For example, with something like social media, if we're not having those conversations, no, we shouldn't be letting them have access to it too young. But by just blocking it and banning it, are we storing up problems for further down the line? And I think it goes deeper as well in terms of our perception of adults about what we think our young people's relationship with technology should be. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about the impact that the pandemic had on our young people and on the relationship that they developed with technology at that time. And I always use the example of like my son who's 17 now, and how for him his whole world during lockdown was an online world, because that was how he saw his friends, that was how he kept his friendships going, that was how he engaged with people. And actually the online world for him at that point was a really social world. He was very careful with it. It kept the friendships going, there was lots of communication, there was lots of support there. But obviously on the flip side of that, you've got young people where actually what they did was retreated into this online world where they didn't have to have any social interaction. And in many cases, they quite liked that world. And when we went back into schools and we were going, it's great, we're all back in the classroom and everything. Actually, there were some people for whom that then was really, really uncomfortable. And I think it becomes uncomfortable for us then to have conversations about the fact that some of our young people are still very insular, find communication difficult, find engaging with others difficult, lost a big chunk of their life to what went on during lockdowns. And we behave now like it was so far in the past, now we don't need to worry about it anymore. No, of course we do. It had a huge impact. And I don't think we have enough of a conversation around when we talk about screen time, what we actually mean by screen usage. So, just because a child is on a phone or on a screen, that what they're doing is automatically negative. We need a much better understanding about what they're choosing to do when they're in that online space. And I think something that someone said to me once that really, really hit home, and they said, if you had a child who was sat there with their head in a book all day, didn't go out, didn't see anyone, literally just stayed in their room and read, would we think that was okay because it's a book? Would we have that same conversation around interaction and socialization, or would we think actually no, this is great because they're reading, so they're learning things, and they're taking in knowledge. And that was something that really made me think that we're not discerning enough when we have these conversations about what are they actually doing when they are using these devices, and what guidance are we giving them to in terms of how to use these safely and responsibly. And I know it's a minefield and there are no easy answers, but I think sometimes it comes back to a conversation about what we think they should be doing based on what we know and how things have always been for us, rather than a wider conversation about some elements of it that works for them in this world that they inhabit now, which is not the world that we inhabited when we were the same age as they are.
A lot to unpack there.
Sorry, a very long answer after just saying yes.
No, I wrote a few things down, and I think this idea that a complete ban, whether it's social media or phones or the two problems with that, and I think you articulated one really well, that actually there's going to be a point where the danger is if we ban phones, internet access, social media, they're going to have this Pandora's box they will enter, and they don't know how to interact. They don't know what's safe. They haven't explored it in a safe, controlled environment. But the other thing is the policing side of it. How do we actually stop that? And I think there is also a danger of being overcautious, and it's having that safe space that we have to foster and create within school to support that. But my question is it just the responsibilities? How can it just be the responsibilities of school to do that? Because it's such a huge element, isn't it? And I know we both got children. I've got
Yeah.
my middleest is they were the COVID year. They were born in the July COVID. They're going into school, and you're seeing so much speech and language issues within school because they didn't have that human interaction at that point. And you've got your children at the other end of the schooling there, and it's affected everyone, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's huge, and no, we can't expect schools to do this on their own. I think schools are expected to do an enormous amount and do an incredible job. Um, but I think it all comes down to the wider partnerships that you have in school and that you develop with parents and families, and with your governors in school and things as well, because you can't do it on your own. You could have something in school where you've got the most amazing setup in terms of like a really careful, supportive, nurturing environment, and then that child might be going home to a completely different reality in terms of what their home life is like. And I think that we've done certain things in school where, there's still an element of how you try and support when they go back into home. So, for example, with things like our Chromebooks that go home with our children, with them still having the school filtering and monitoring on it, so that we know when they take them into that home environment that device is protected and still can be used in a safe way. But I think we need to be having far more conversations with our parents and our families in school and bringing them into the discussions about this, because if we feel unprepared for all of this, they feel doubly unprepared. I mean, one of the things we did recently at school was a parental marketplace event where it was very much about healthy habits for young people, and alongside all of the sort of the traditional healthy habits that you think of in terms of, like, mental health and well-being and things, we also looked at things like screen time and AI use and digital tools. And we had students showing parents even things like, this is how, did you know your child has these restrictions that you can turn on their phone? Having those conversations about, just because your child is 16, 17 years old doesn't mean you can't still have a rule that says, actually, when you go to bed at night, your phone comes downstairs. So it's not in your room with you. So you're not having that constant distraction. You're having a break from it when you're putting the technology away. But I think it goes back to, and that's hard sometimes, that partnership with schools, because it's the schools are learning at the same time as the families are learning, and the schools are the ones where the families often turn to them for, well, what should we do? We've had parents before saying, at what age should I give my child a phone? And we're like, we can give guidance, but we can't tell you that. You're the parent, sort of thing. So I think we're going to need to have much wider and deeper discussions about this, to be honest, going forwards, alongside what you've been saying as well about the idea about the principles you're teaching young people about the usage of this technology, and not just these are the rules, this is what you do and don't do.
Yeah, and I think one thing COVID has taught us is the classroom isn't four walls anymore.
Yeah.
Actually, that relationship and that whole element of the community, and it's taken several years after COVID to even invite the community in again. And
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with and it was on a podcast I did a while ago, I think in September last year, about an online school, but it was an online alternate provision school. And we were talking about how does the relationship work? And she was saying that actually you can get a really good relationship online, still talking like we are here. But at that point, if the child's frustrated, they would just close the laptop screen. They would have their own space. They knew where to go to. They opened it up and had that continued the conversation when they were ready in that right time. And I think it's beyond the screen, it's beyond technology. It's actually learning. One of the things about schooling, and with it's coming out with the future skills and everything else, is actually we want a love of learning. And it could be one child loves the idea of creating music, and technology could be the catalyst, and AI could be the catalyst of actually getting them going. And the barrier of entry is a lot lower, but the depth of understanding is there. And I think I want to go back to that point you made about having those students and pupils. How can we ensure they have agency in those decisions about how technology and AI tools are used in their education?
I think ask them, for starters. I know that's not meant to be a flippant reply at all, but I think that an awful lot of the conversations at the moment around AI and AI use in school is happening at teacher level, is happening
Mm.
at support staff level, is happening at senior leadership team level, is maybe happening at governor level, but isn't always happening at student level. And at the end of the day, they are the end users of all of this. This is that they are, our ultimate stakeholders in school, I suppose, is the way to look at it. And I think that it's that striking that balance again between keeping them safe, but also not wrapping them in cotton wool. Because, like I say, I think it's really hard to teach young people about AI if you never let them use any AI, if you never let them see what AI is, if you just tell them that it's this thing that you shouldn't be touching. So, one of those things that I would say is, and a really straightforward one like we've done in school is set up an AI steering group made up of students from different year groups. Because you can do things where you sort of, we've done student surveys to ask them how they're using AI at the moment. But we don't want that to be a one-off. We don't want that to just be a one-off tokenistic, let's ask you what you think at this point in time, and then we can tick a box and say we've done this, and then we never come back to that again. It's if we actually have them as a steering group, and it was a very deliberate decision to call it a steering group as well, is that they're meeting regularly. They meet once a month with a proper meeting, with an agenda, with things that we're covering, and that they don't just talk as part of that meeting, they then produce things to support others. So, for example, they were some of the students that supported that parental marketplace that I talked to you about earlier. They will be doing things like, well, they have done already, creating podcasts that are going to be supporting staff. We have a parental newsletter that goes out once a week. They're going to be having an input into that in terms of creating resources that can then go to parents to teach them a bit more about AI. They're doing helping create resources to support teachers and things as well. And we're able to shift and flex as AI evolves, because the agenda for those meetings is very flexible. So we meet once a month, and we think we might know what we're going to be talking about in one meeting, but then that might change because AI might have changed, and inevitably always does. But it's a tangible way for us to be getting that student voice on a regular basis. And again, I think when you sort of sent me these questions, we were talking about our current AI systems. It's, what do we mean by a system as well? Do we mean a school system, or do we mean a system as in the AI itself? Do the tools and how they are developed, is there enough student voice in there in terms of tools that are being developed to support students? And not just AI tools, tools in general that are used in school. So I think it's one of those things where it's just really important that we start the conversation, because also it's not just the conversation about how can we use these students to help others. It's that, what are their concerns, what are their worries about AI? I mean, we know when we spoke to our students and we said, are you worried about AI? They're not worried about AI per se as a thing. They're accepting it as another new tool, part of life that they will be using as they grow up. What they're worried about is us getting them ready for jobs that aren't going to exist anymore because they're going to be done by AI in the future. That's actually their biggest worry, and that for us then leads into some really important conversations to be having about, right, so actually, in terms of what we do as school, in terms of preparing you not just for jobs but for life, what do we need to make sure that we're teaching you? What are those skills that are genuinely going to make you future ready, just not future ready if your future was right now, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and that idea about a student steering group is something similar to what Scott Hayden does at Basingstoke College, and they do it in such a way where, if they want to implement something new or a new system or something else, they have a steering group with key leaders, key teachers, but also students on that panel. And it may be he goes across and he presents something, but you get those different contrasting viewpoints. And I know pre-show we talked about adolescence, and you asked your son if he'd watched it. It's like, no. And actually, we may put our opinion out there or viewpoints onto others is completely unfounded. And I think there's a huge danger in that as well, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I went to something yesterday. I was really lucky. I went down to where Bet's based at Hive, and they were doing an event all about how we can use technology to support learners with SEND. And there was a group of students there from UCL who presented about how they had been using AI to develop tools to support learners with special needs. And it was absolutely fascinating, because it was these groups of young people who stood up. They were so articulate, just from, forget the AI, from an oracy and a presenting point of view, they were amazing. But they talked us all through the learning need that they were looking to address, the tool they decided they were going to create, and how they'd used AI to support as part of that process. And it was what I really liked about it was the fact that it was demonstrating how, again, we sometimes assume that the default setting for our young people is they're going to go to use this for evil, whereas actually, you put some of these tools in their hands and they're coming up with some incredible, amazing, innovative ideas to make their world and our world better, because often they can see things that are possible that we don't necessarily see, because we're not coming at things from the same mindset. So that's the other thing I would say about the importance of student voice, is it's not just the helping tell us what we need to be doing, it's the seeing what the potential of this is as a technology, when you give it to someone who is really open-minded, believes that anything's possible, perhaps doesn't bring all of our biases and cynicism to the table, and then goes ahead and creates something with it.
And it's that whole process, isn't it? I think too often we look at what the end goal is. We don't
Yeah.
know what the end goal is. We can't ever predict whether it's like the coursework or whether it's actually the end goal with jobs in the future. It's that process of learning. Here's the problem that we can fix now, or we can have a look at how can we get there? How can we? I love that example of the SEN and finding their needs. But do you think then AI and technology has a way to amplify that student voice in a way it hasn't before?
Oh, 100%, because I think that you can have, I mean, the phrase tech for good was used a lot yesterday, and it was that thing of actually, again, we know when we talk to students, we identify that there's a problem or something or a challenge. It's one thing to sort of say to them, oh, this challenge exists. It's a bit like, things like climate change. And again, one of the things that I'm sure we'll touch on at some point is the environmental impact of all this AI and everything that we're all using. But when you identify a problem for young people and then say, actually, tell us how you think you can solve this. So it goes back to the idea about the project-based learning, doesn't it? And actually giving them a really clear purpose for why they're doing something. And I think that was what was so powerful for me with regards to yesterday, was seeing what these students have done, because it's almost like a natural progression on from what we get our students to do with things like apps for good, where we say to them, right, okay, identify a real world problem, use technology to come up with a tool that potentially can solve it, and then present your idea as if you were an adult to a panel of judges, to a team of tech experts, to that sort of thing, and we empower them in that way. And that, I think, is really, really important. We don't do enough of that, and without something as huge as AI, we need to be saying to our young people, and we need to say it's okay to fall forward, that you're trying things out, because again, when we go back to teaching them skills that are going to be really useful in the future, and teaching them resilience and teaching them creative thinking and critical thinking, and surely that's a way of them actually getting hands on and doing that as well, rather than just talking about it, is giving them the means to turn that into something real and tangible that they can then take forwards.
How would we then? We're talking about some lovely ideas then, but they're going to be students and pupils who will, for coursework, for whatever reason, they're put into AI, and there is created, or even now you can have agents online and operators where you have like Spark or whatever equivalent online homework. You log into an AI operator and it can complete it for you. And from a teacher's perspective, you never know. So, how do we then develop that with pupils or teachers? And how do we break that barrier that it can be just not the end goal? It can be the process as well.
Yeah, I think it's a two-stage approach to it, and it's a shift in mindset, because I'm sure we had incidences in the past where one child would be getting their homework done by another child and handing that over to them, or would be looking up the answer to something on Wikipedia as opposed to actually using their own knowledge of what they've learned in a lesson to answer a question. And I think it's a multiple layered answer. I mean, I think you mentioned Scott Hayden earlier. I think the work he's doing around about how we approach assessment and how we test knowledge and skills is really, really important. That way of going, actually, we've got a very traditional way of assessing knowledge that longer term is going to have to change, isn't it? Because we're just not going to be able to assess knowledge in the same way, in terms of, here's a piece of work I've written, or have I written it, or has AI written it? And again, I think, as a teacher who knows your class, there's knowledge you can bring to the table. If you have got that child that normally will struggle to write you a few paragraphs and suddenly hands in this brilliant 6-page, beautifully written essay, you're going to have your suspicions. But again, I've listened to a conversation at Bet where there was a student saying, do you know what's really insulting is when someone turns around and says to you, has this been done with AI? And it's your own work, and you're accused of having used AI, and you haven't. It is your own work. So we know that the plagiarism checkers don't work. We know that we can't rely on that. And again, I think that sometimes there are some teachers at the moment and going, oh, please just bring out something that does this for us, that does rid of this problem. I don't think there's ever going to be that. So I think we need to rethink how we do assessment, how we test knowledge. But I think we also need to really instill in our young people this sense of, and again, I bang on about it all the time, this idea about digital character, making good choices, that you, and for us at the moment, we're halfway between a system. We've got a very traditional paper-based, written exam-based system, and then we've got these young people who are using all these digital tools to support their learning, some in a really productive way, some in a not so productive way. And the conversations we have with children are very much around the idea of, like, yes, if you get AI to do everything for you, and you can, and you probably could, and maybe we wouldn't be able to tell, sooner or later you are going to be in a situation where your learning is going to be tested in a more traditional way. You are either going to be sitting in an exam hall, or you're going to be having to write something by hand under a time pressure, and that is the point when what you've done is going to become apparent. So actually, all you're doing when you are cheating in that way is you are cheating yourself. And it's those choices then we then have a conversation around, okay, so if you want to use AI and you want to use AI to coach and support you, what are some of the ways that you can be using it in a more Socrative way, rather than just automatic replacement? I'm going to get it to do it for me. And again, that's not a means to an end. There will always be children who will still always take the easy route. Of course there will be. There would have been times in my school days when, if it was there, I would have done, sort of thing. But again, we need to unpick that and understand why, if we're making it easy for these students to complete something for us in that way, it goes back to the idea of, well, what work are we setting? What are we testing? What are we looking to see demonstrated? And are we asking to see that knowledge demonstrated in the right way? But I know that's a huge seismic shift for education. It's not an easy answer, and we're obviously not there yet.
Hi, secondary school teachers. We're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering maths circles across the UK.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
website, The Conversation features details of new research which suggests that parents may not play a role in the development of maths anxiety amongst their children. Existing research indicates that maths anxiety is present amongst pupils in their first years of primary school, and that it interferes with maths learning and performance. This new research, conducted in collaboration with 3 universities in Italy and Loughborough University in the UK, looks into the role parents play in the development of the anxiety. The research followed 126 children from Italy from the age of 3 to 8, assessing their maths skills and their level of maths anxiety at key points. Parental maths anxiety was measured at the start of the study. The results indicate that having a parent with higher levels of maths anxiety did not make it more likely that their children would also have it. This is different to general anxiety. However, the research did show that children of parents with maths anxiety did less well at maths. In preschool children's numeracy, skills were lower if their parents were more anxious about maths, and those children continued to have lower maths attainment by the age of 8. But, unlike reading, where research clearly indicates that parental engagement with it increases children's level of skill, maths is more complicated. Sometimes parental involvement made things worse. Other things like playing number games and counting had minimal effect. Full details of the summary of the research can be found at theconversation.com. In related news, maths appears in a story from the Monmouthshire News, which says that the new research indicates that 71% of parents in Wales couldn't pass Grade 4 GCSE maths. When given a sample question, a survey of 2,000 parents and carers found that only 21% got it right, with 34% admitting they didn't know the answer and 37% getting it wrong. The results came from a survey conducted by Flash Learning, and it also showed that 65% of parents believe supporting their children with GCSE homework resulted in them needing to do their homework first. 57% of Welsh parents also believe that they would fail the exam if they sat it today. The Mail Online covers more reaction to the Netflix drama Adolescence. This time it is comments from Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, as she called for more male teachers to provide strong, positive male role models. Speaking at the inaugural Festival of Childhood in London, Phillipson said boys needed to be raised with the strength to reject hatred being spread online. She echoed recent warnings from former England football manager Gareth Southgate and police chiefs who have cautioned about the impact social media influencers can have. The festival was hosted by Children's Commissioner Dame Rachel de Souza, and Miss Phillipson spoke at length about the dangers of disinformation, toxic role models and hatred, and stressed the importance of thinking analytically, weighing up arguments and reasoning. Ms Phillipson did acknowledge that the responsibility does start at home with parents, but added, "I want more male teachers, teaching, guiding and leading the boys in our classrooms." The BBC covers the judicial review of the government's policy of adding VAT to private school fees. Barristers representing Chancellor Rachel Reeves, HMRC, and the Department for Education said private school parents paying their fair share would help raise standards for children who attended state schools. The judicial review was brought by 3 separate groups, including parents of children with special educational needs and disabilities and low-paying faith schools. The groups claim the policy is discriminatory and incompatible with human rights law. Full details of the story can be found on the BBC News website. The hearing decision is expected at a later date. Finally, BBC Breakfast covered the opening of an exhibition at the Food Museum in Stowmarket, Suffolk, which offers visitors the opportunity to sample semolina, pink custard and turkey Twizzlers. The showcase of school dinners through the ages from the 1940s to the present day will help visitors learn about the history of school meals policy. The museum's director, Jenny Cousins, said school dinners were a cross-generational experience, and that whilst the food tasting added a bit of fun, there was a serious side of the history of why we feed children at school. The exhibition will remain at the museum until February 2027. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
So let's think about then the shift into what teachers, and then we'll talk about almost what students need to know. But let's start, and I know you've probably alluded to a little bit about it already. Let's think about teachers. What misconceptions do you think educators have about AI in the classroom? Because there are going to be people out there who may be listening to the show and thinking, okay, we've heard about AI all over the place. Okay, they may have they have their own opinions because it's spoken in almost every discussion at the moment about different things. And it's even in the review for the DFE, they were talking about artificial intelligence, and even the DFE have got views over how it could be used. But what do you think some of the biggest misconceptions are? Because you've worked with a lot of schools and a lot of trusts around the country.
I think that from what I've seen, you tend to find that educators are split into two camps. You've got staff that, as soon as AI came out, got quite excited by it, saw some of the potential of it, started experimenting with it in their own time, were maybe doing things that, that not in school, but they were sort of going home and testing out things on like ChatGPT and other platforms and this sort of thing. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got educators who are going, I am absolutely terrified by this, and my mindset towards this is shaped by what I see in the media, which is horrendous in terms of AI is going to destroy us all, that sort of thing. I don't want to go near it. I don't agree with it. I don't think it has any place in teaching and learning. And I think you've got that two very, very different camps there. And almost like with the ones that are racing ahead, there's almost that kind of tempering of going, are you making sure you're doing this safely? Are you making sure you've got the guardrails in place for this? Are you making sure you're not putting in student data, student information just because you can? Are you not allowing it to just replace what you used to do as a teacher completely? That's that side of things. But going almost like to the other end, to the other teachers that are sort of really, really wary of it. One of the starting points is I think that people that haven't really used AI assume it's really difficult to use. And one of the things that I almost did as a starting point, for quite some time, was actually just show people what the entry screen to Gemini looked like, because people assume it's something really complicated. When you start talking about large language models and it all gets very techie and computer science teachery and this sort of thing, a lot of staff just go, no, not for me. It's too complicated. Whereas actually it's in terms of what you're saying about what do people need to know, I think they need to know what AI is and how it works and what to be aware of and where the limitations are. But also I think they need to know that it's not complicated to use, and that what tools are out there that they can use, what the outputs will be, how it can potentially support and coach them, how it can save them some time, because let's be honest, teacher workload is a huge thing at the moment, and we know that. And not just how can they stay safe when they're using it, but if they're in the role of guiding students to use it, how can they make sure that they stay safe as well? So those would be the key things, and then getting into slightly more sophisticated conversations around where can it add value to teaching and learning, and not just can I get this to do this for me and save time. And when we have the conversations around, I always say about when we talk about digital character, that we're talking about teaching this to the students. We are just as much teaching it to us as staff in terms of what we're doing and how we're using it and how we should be using it, and equally how we shouldn't be using it. And in some ways it's a similar sort of conversations around the coaching and a guide, and those conversations around what should it never replace, what can it never do, as a machine, what should you never ask it to do, what should it never be removing from that process of being a teacher.
Yeah, and there can be a huge gulf in knowledge, can't there, between what students are doing to what teachers know as well. And I think this element of pupils, they like to play, they like to experiment, they like to push things to the boundaries, and we need to create those boundaries in a safe environment so they can do that. And you think about the early years curriculum, always come back to that, how beautiful it is in terms of continuous provision, and we direct and we encourage and we support, but it's all of that play and exploration is the way that's learning. There's very little direct instruction because that's the way it works within that setting, and with that age. And we still need to have that element of play. But there is also completely other side where you're going to have teachers who will use it for all their report writing, who will use it for all their lesson planning, who will use it for all their resource creation and everything else. So how can we then get teachers to use it ethically and efficiently without relying on it as a crutch to do that?
I think
Complete-
that's where we need to be having the conversations throughout school, because I think that the danger at the moment that can happen in a lot of places is that because AI is just this huge, overwhelming beast, you've potentially sometimes got schools and trusts that go, we're just not ready for it. We haven't got time to deal with it at the moment. There's so many other pressures. We know it's kind of going on and it's happening and staff are using it, students are using it, but we're not really, we don't know how to guide them. So we're not, we're not putting anything out there. I think what's really important is to start to have the conversation, even if it's on just a small level, because as soon as you start going into conversations around what should teachers be using AI for and what should they not be using AI for, I tend to find you often get into some really deep philosophical conversations about what is the very nature of teaching and what role do teachers exist to deliver. What should that role look like? And it's the other thing as well is it's different in every school and in every setting. So there's not like, you can't have a kind of one size fits all. This is what you should use AI for, and this is what you shouldn't use AI for. So for example, you use the example of reports, and I know of schools where they're using AI sort of wrapper apps that allow them to write student reports, large numbers at speed and get them done. There will be other schools that will have that same conversation and go, actually, no, we want to maintain the role of the teacher in that, and we want the teacher to write the reports, and that's going to be an expectation that we have, is that those reports are written by a teacher. You might have another school that goes, do you know what? Are parents even reading these reports? Don't we need to have that conversation around how valuable are these reports now? And so it's never just a straightforward conversation around should AI be doing this or should it not. Where I think there is a danger with AI is that often our teachers that are newer to the profession, it's much more tempting for them to reach for AI to support them with that big workload that they have, that huge amount of learning that they've got to do themselves. And I know when I've had conversations with teachers that are much more established, have been teaching for years and years, and we've talked about AI, they've gone, well, I would never get AI to plan a lesson for me, and it's like, that's because you've got that knowledge and all those years of experience of Ofsted inspections where you've been told you're a fantastic teacher, you've got that self-confidence, you know what you're doing, you don't need to reach for AI. But actually, sometimes some of the teachers that are newer to the profession that need to do things more themselves, that actually is when it is incredibly tempting to reach for AI. And that's where I think the role is on the mentors in school, the line managers in school, to be saying, actually, yeah, we are going to have a really clear understanding about where we'll say to you, you can do this with AI, but then we want to guide and support you in terms of where we want to still be developing you as a teacher. So we're going to say this shouldn't be done by AI. We want you to do this in that way. And again, that is very personalized conversations in schools. That is very personalized conversations in departments about what role AI should and shouldn't play as part of the process of teaching and learning and admin and workload.
So what would you say then? I think you've picked up on a few things already. Where do you think teacher intuition still trumps machine intelligence and AI?
Oh, that's such a good question. And that is such a good one.
And this may change. Obviously, this will change. So the moment this comes out, something may change with AI. But
No,
at the
I
moment,
don't think this bit will actually. There's a lot of things that I would
That's
say
good.
will change with AI, but I think this is something that will
Good.
not change with AI. At the end of the day, I know that when either a teacher or a student talks to AI, that AI can mold itself to sound like the most supportive, understanding friend, confidant that child teacher has ever spoken to. And that's obviously one of the dangers with AI, is that it can come across as so human. But obviously, when a large language model is demonstrating empathy, it is only ever simulating empathy and what it thinks empathy looks like. It is never ever going to be able to know that child, know that child's wider circumstance. And that's the other thing, is like the wider context that exists outside of the prompt that you put into the LLM. The you know that child who comes into school and you know something's wrong. You know there needs to be a wider conversation. You know that they're not going to be able to engage in learning today in the same way because something has obviously happened, and there needs to be that other conversation. And I think that what AI is never going to replace is that pupil teacher relationship. Now, I think sometimes people think that the pupil teacher relationship must be the teacher standing at the front imparting knowledge. That's part of that relationship. And yes, up until a point, but I would say actually the role of the teacher is much more that kind of providing the support and the scaffolding and the nurture that allows that child to learn in whatever way is best for them. And some of that will be in the classroom, and some of that might be from home, and some of that might be a hybrid learning model. But the role of the teacher is to understand that child. And I think sometimes one of the things that happens in schools is obviously that's what teachers want to do. That's probably why they went into the profession. They didn't, but it's all the other burden of admin and paperwork and reporting and data drops and all these things that pull them away from that. And particularly if you're a teacher, obviously teaching a large number of classes where you're supposed to know all these children. That's the bit that I think shouldn't ever be replaced, because the other thing that the teacher brings to that child is genuine life experience. Genuine knowledge of things, genuine passion for learning, the ability to talk about something from their own personal experience. Again, an LLM can simulate that, but it is only ever going to be a simulation. It's not going to be that person talking to that child. And I think that's the thing for me. And I know it's a bit lightning in a bottle. It's a really difficult one to quantify and to crystallize. But that's the aspect that I think needs to stay in whatever else AI it ends up being able to do and support with. That's the bit that teachers need to retain.
It's that authentic human, and
Yes.
it's that relationship. And we're quite data rich in education. We get all this data, but we don't necessarily analyze it and use it to the full effect. And I think there is
No.
an element there where you go in. So for example, year 6 moderation, they deliberately build a human element into that data, because you are talking about that child and their experiences, and that should be an element of it. And I think that's a really important theme. So I want to say thank you to the BET awarding Kilo, who is a 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. They are one of our sponsors at the moment, who have made Teachers Talk Radio be possible. So students can instantly and simultaneously create an interactive map of discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kilo to make a world a more thoughtful place. And so join them at Kilio, that's KIALO-edu.com. This show is also brought to you in partnership with John Catt Education Publishers, our professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools across the world. So level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. And if you use the code JCTTR2425, that's JCTTR2425, you can get 20% off your order. Now, one of the things that there's a theme coming up a lot around, if you look at AI at the moment, from what the DfE are bringing out and other bits and things, is this being AI literate. But what is being AI literate actually mean, and what should it include for staff and also pupils, because they are two almost separate camps? What do you think the essential bits are? So what is it, and what do you think it should include for those two stakeholders?
I mean, again, I will answer your question, but I'm gonna caveat it. If that's okay. I think that what AI literacy is different for different end users, basically. So if I am a member of support staff in a school working as a teaching assistant, then what I need in terms of AI literacy to do my job well is going to be very different to perhaps what the head teacher needs to know, or or another member of senior leadership team, or a governor, or something like that. So I would caveat it with that. This is kind of not like a one size fits all, but I think that all staff, and again, I'm talking about staff here rather than students, really what staff need to have is a basic understanding of what AI is, how it works, and also what it is not. So, you know, just and like I say, it's the kind of, it goes back to the whole thing of you know, all teachers are a teacher of safeguarding, that sort of thing. You know, that kind of, we know that AI is permeating all areas of our young people's lives now. So it's not good enough to simply say, I don't know what AI is, and so I can't have a discussion with a child if they come and disclose something to me and say, I've used AI to do this. You know, I can't have that conversation because I don't know what AI is. So a basic entry level, I think, understanding of what AI is and how it works, and what it is not. And I think the what it is not is absolutely crucial, because that's the conversations that I sort of mentioned at the start, that Chris Goodall mentioned, that thing about the relationship, not just what AI is and how it works, and you know how a large language model works, but also the danger of the sort of intense relationship that young people can develop with AI, because of the fact that it's always going to be the most supportive and understanding friend that that they could ever hope for. I think that staff and students, when you're looking at a literacy curriculum, for example, or teaching AI literacy, they need to be using AI. They need to know how to use AI. There should be some fundamental basic tools. They should need to know how to write a good prompt. They should need to know how to question and output. I think that all staff need to have an understanding about safeguarding and guardrails and the guidance that should be in place with them when it comes to using AI. And that may be things that their school or their trust has set as rules and regulations, or it might be, you know, there's also that personal knowledge as well that they need to have about what you shouldn't put into AI, what you shouldn't ask AI to do for you. But also as well, I think there's this thing about when you're guiding students, what is an acceptable use of AI? And I always go back to like the Leon Furs scale. I really like that, the assessment scale, in terms of, if you're saying to students you can use AI, this is what you can use it for, having a knowledge of where it might be appropriate to use AI to, rather than saying, did you use AI for this assessment you shouldn't have done, looking at a model in terms of thinking about, as a teacher, how could you develop an assessment scale like that. The other thing I think is really important as well is the relevance to your subject area. So if we're talking about AI literacy in the context of a teacher, each teacher should be able to develop an understanding, not just about how to teach young people what AI is, but also how it's relevant to their subject area and the conversations that they're going to have in terms of future careers, future roles, the how it's relevant, you know, how it might be used in jobs in the future, that sort of thing. And again, the one that I always come back to, and I have used this lots of times, so apologies if you've heard it before, is that working with a really amazing RE teacher who, when AI started becoming a thing that we were having conversations about, and you know, we were talking about it in the corridor, and she said, oh my goodness, she said, I'm going to have to start talking about AI in the context of a soul, aren't I? She said, I'm going to have to start to, and it was like discussing the plot of iRobot, to be honest. It was really a conversation around what it means to be human. But when we talk about AI and AI consciousness and everything, she said, we do a whole unit looking at the soul and what it means to be conscious. She said, I need to start interweaving conversations around AI and where that fits into the curriculum, to keep that curriculum relevant for the young people I'm working with when I'm teaching this as a particular topic. And that's what I mean in terms of the subject literacy in relation to AI as well. And then with regards to students and to young people, I think it comes back to this thing all the time around those same key things, but this element of digital character in terms of helping to knowing how to make good choices with whatever tools are out there and are going to be out there in the future, and knowing when to use AI, but equally importantly, when not to use AI as well. Sorry, that's a very, very lengthy answer there. I wrote a lot down so I wouldn't forget things. So
No, that's fine. And I think that, and that is important, all of those bits you've put in there. But is there a danger that, because AI is something completely different than what we could ever envisage, but is there a danger in framing it as another just digital skill, rather than actually the seismic shift it has, almost in the way we think and how we interact and what we're going to do with assessments, and how all of those different elements and nuances is it just another digital skill, or is it more than that?
it's far more than that. And I think, again, where we've moved away in schools from having fixed guidance, because my worry is with anything that comes out, and you alluded to it earlier, you know, whenever you go on LinkedIn, whenever you go online, and I just say thank goodness for all those people that are out there that are just testing these AI tools all the time, so I don't have to, and then telling me the latest developments. Oh, and it does this now, and you need to be aware of it. That's so important. The problem with having a fixed set of guidance or a fixed set of rules is you are going to have to change them very, very quickly. And anything that exists in a kind of printed medium or even as in a digital medium is going to go out of date. And what I mean by that, just to give you as an example, we have a technology toolkit in school for staff, but we've deliberately produced it as it's almost like a sort of a set of Canva slides, because I need to be able to go in regularly and update that, because the guidance is always evolving and changing for the staff. So if you have a new member of staff starts, who says, oh, well, what's our policy on this in relation to AI, or what's our where can I find the guidance for this? They will go into that toolkit as a resource, and that needs to constantly be able to change. And again, how we often do things in schools is we'll maybe and sometimes in trust as well, we'll develop a policy at the start of a year, and then we'll put it out there, or guidance, and then it sits there all year, and it doesn't change until it gets reviewed. And I think that the challenge with AI is that it's moving so much faster than that. But again, I think going back to what you were saying, James, around is there a danger it's just going to be seen as another tool? 100%. I know I've had conversations with people where, and you can understand where they come from. They've seen so many fads in schools. It's everyone's got to have a learning platform. We're all going to have an interactive whiteboard, and it's going to transform teaching and learning. Most people have got a cupboard of iPads somewhere sat that we're going to transform teaching and learning. Nothing against iPads, by the way, they're great. But you know what I mean? This idea about you must introduce something because it's going to be the big game changer. And then there is that that trough of disillusionment that people like Darren White, Mark Anderson talk about, where you've got that initial implementation, and then no, it hasn't transformed anything because it's not been properly thought through, and people are just treating AI in the same way because it's getting all the noise and attention at the moment. And I think that there's a lot of places where people are going, if I just sit this one out, it's going to go away and there's going to be something else. And I think the shock for people is going to be that it's not going away. It's only going to become more and more pervasive, more and more underpinning everything that we do. And the gap between those schools and trusts that get it and are doing things with it and develop and having these conversations, and those that are not, is just going to get wider and wider and wider. And that's the worry. And that's the worry about fixed guidance as well, is that it will be perfect for that point in time, but then immediately as things start to develop, things go out of date.
That there's something that I'm concerned around, and I didn't put this in the set of questions, so I knew I'd throw you one.
You're going to go rogue. I knew you'd go rogue on me.
But there's this idea you just said, the gap will widen.
Yeah.
There's a huge gap already between those who have that digital knowledge within schools and who are critical about its use and using it purposefully, but then also schools who don't even have the infrastructure to safely actually do set filtering in school even. And with the DfE guidance saying, okay, we need to get to these standards by 2030, that's going to potentially come in place and get that done. Do you think there is a danger that the gap will widen? And if you've got parents of affluent schools where they just pay for the subscription of AI for their child because it's £20 a month and it'll make a big difference, and they won't necessarily then help their child, they'll just pay for AI to do it, to be their tutor in some ways. Because it is really interesting if you look at the OECD reports that actually we're twice rich in this country, but how they're spread out is not fair at all. And it's actually, there's a huge gap there. So do you think there's a danger of this digital divide growing?
Absolutely. And I think what's really sad as well is that it's not just to do with the economics of where your school is, although obviously that plays a big part. What seems to make the biggest difference at the moment is if you are in an organization where you've got leaders who understand this, understand why it's important, are quite innovative, and who drive this, because it's very much going against the grain of all the other pressures that are on schools and are on trusts. I mean, obviously we've had the thing recently about financial implications going forward of some of the things that have happened over the last week and everything. And there's always going to be other priorities for schools and trusts to focus on, whether it's Ofsted, whether it's exam season, whether it's something else, whether it's teacher recruitment and retention, which of course is such a huge challenge as well. And my worry is not just about the digital divide growing, is about the lack of priority given to this in general, because it's not a statutory mandatory requirement. So like I say, it very much comes down to if you are lucky enough to have leaders that go, yeah, completely understand why this is important, and like I said, I've been so lucky, I've worked for a series of leaders like that, where people go, yeah, we're going to give this we're going to send you to that AI conference, Emma, we're going to have these conversations at senior leadership team level, we're going to develop a plan for this, we're going to talk about the challenges and how we're going to develop this and what guidance we're going to give staff and everything. If you're not in an organization like that, and you're maybe one lone teacher that thinks this is important, it's going to be so hard then to drive that more widely. And I think and like you say, things like the digital standards, I think, are really helpful in some ways, and almost like saying this is what you should be aiming to be at. But then in terms of like giving schools the support and saying we're going to make this a priority. So for, one of my things that I've banged on about for years is that, if you had an Ofsted inspection where Ofsted came in and asked to talk about your digital strategy and how it links to teaching and learning, every school would have one, because they'd have to. That would be massively transformational. But because that's not one of the drivers, very much, again, whether you've got one of those or not depends on whether or not you think it's important. I thought it was interesting, the one of the digital standards that said you should have someone on your senior leadership team who is responsible for digital technology. Now, I think that one came out after I'd been in post for about 10 years. And I just thought how lucky I was to have been appointed by a leader at that point that knew that and knew that was important at that point in time. But, if you're a school going, should we have someone doing this? Should we not? Where's the guidance? Chances are you're going to go, no, actually, we need to focus on another area, aren't you? So that's my worry. That's what I think is going to cause the gap to grow exponentially as well.
And it is those schools who have got that, or trusts who have got that, are brave, because it is a
Yes.
different job and it's a different way of thinking, or it's a different element of someone's job. Because when you look at it, you've got to have almost the teaching and learning knowledge. You've got to have
Yeah.
the technical knowledge, and then also, it's combining that is actually quite hard. And being a
Yeah.
leader in education and organising that is quite difficult. But when we've talked a lot about the dangers and also what's the interesting things around AI, but one thing that keeps coming up all the time is this idea of the future, and we alluded to it a little bit earlier about the purpose of coursework and what's the purpose of all of this. So how do we then strike a balance between the digital and AI skills and the core human skills like empathy or critical thinking? And should we be looking at skills of the future? And are we prepping students for a job market that may never exist? Or does that even matter, that we don't focus on the job market at all? And I'm particularly primary, so this is something where I only look at it into feeding them into secondary at the moment. And so actually this element really interests me. And that's why I've talked to a lot of secondary colleagues recently about yes, we've got at the moment the constraints of what the scheme use and what the exam boards do and how coursework's done and all of that. There's always nuances within there we can play with and develop. So what are your thoughts around that future?
Well, firstly, one of the things I got my knuckles wrapped for when I went to something the other week was somebody said, I really hate it when schools talk about preparing young people for the world of work, because they said our job is so much more. We're not preparing them just for whatever job they're going to go into. We're preparing them for life. And that actually, in some ways, when you talk then about the sort of the skills that they're going to need to have in this sort of AI enabled world, that makes it a little bit easier to have that conversation. I think, yeah, like we've already talked, and I won't bang on about it too much, about the idea about how assessment needs to change in terms of like, what we mean by knowledge, what we mean by actually useful knowledge. What are we teaching these young people in terms of not just what can they bring back out for an exam, what are we teaching them that they can then apply in a useful way? And one of the things that I would say is going to be an absolute critical skill going forward in terms of like the critical thinking is, how can you identify content that is fake, that has been generated artificially and is not real because it's getting so good and it's getting so convincing. What are the skills we're going to give our young people to be able to be really critical consumers of the content that they see online? Because again, as we were saying, they're not watching it on TV. That's what we old fogies do. They're going online. That's how they're consuming their content and everything else. So I said we old fogies there, James. That's very insulting. I mean, the obviously. But I think the other thing as well is that we need to have more conversations about this. Because we're spending so much time now talking about AI and digital and technical, and we're spending so much time on items of technology and working in an online world and online space. I think we need to be spending a lot more time supporting our young people with the nature of the idea of what it means to be human, what it means to actually exist in our world and in nature, for example. And again, do we take them out enough to get out into the natural world and into nature? Because we're talking about the priority of AI. I mentioned earlier, one of the things that is a huge concern for young people is climate change and sustainability and the world that they're inheriting. Not just, are there going to be jobs there that they can do, but also this idea about, is there even going to be a world left for them to live on? So I think we need to be doing a lot more about balancing this relationship between technology and the amount of time you spend online, and then how you are developing a healthy relationship with the in-person world as opposed to the on-person world. And that involves putting the technology down and going out and getting into it. And and I don't want to rub your nose in it, but I am going to be on holiday next week. And one of the things that that I'm going to be doing is I spend a lot of my time on technology, using technology. I'm going to be putting that away. I'm going to be going out in my garden. I'm going to be going out by the seaside. I'm going to be, completely shutting off to technology and AI and everything else. And kind of like the term I use all the time is really trying to ground myself back in the real world a bit, because a lot of my working week is spent on technology, and it is that thing of actually going, when there is that downtime, that reconnecting. Because when we have all these conversations about what it means to be human, what it means to be a human being as opposed to AI, how on earth are our young people going to be able to have conversations about that if all they ever do is sit in a room plugged into technology? And are we modeling that to them as well? Are we just as bad? Because I know that sometimes are we sat there on our phones without giving them our full attention at home? Are we spending more time sat in front of the TV than actually getting out there and being in the natural world, as it were, sort of thing? And I think, as much as anything, when we're preparing young people for the future, and we've talked a lot about things like digital skills and how AI is going to influence that, it's not losing that connection with the actual world around them and that care and consideration for the planet that they live on and that they are impacting on. Because otherwise we can have the best, most successful AI in the world, but what's it all for? What's it actually, what is that life of theirs going to look like if they don't have that connection with the world outside the online world as well?
And it's that I've written down one word here: purpose. We need to be purposeful with our use. We need to balance it. And it's making sure that we have those connections. We had some people the other day come around and see our use of technology, and actually children were outside. They were using it for a real core purpose and looking at the golf swing, but they're using technology in a way that actually technology is just there to support them. But there are points that we don't need to use it, and we go out and go and play and we go and explore. But I think one of the key things we've got to consider, and something that I don't think we talk enough about, and it's quite difficult, 'cause obviously educators and parents and everything else, is that modeling of the behavior.
Yes.
We've done things over time, but we've never really thought about the consequences of it. And it's now come to the forefront, actually. What is the consequence of me doom scrolling on my social media while my kids are going to play? Actually, what do they see? Well, daddy doesn't care, daddy's
Yeah.
not playing with us and not doing that. And it's been brilliant the last week. My son's got into playing chess and I have no idea how to play. So we're both learning at the same time. But we're there just playing and talking and exploring, and that's what it should be. It shouldn't be actually passively looking at the screen doing something. It's there as a way to enhance and redefine what is possible and how we can create and how we can do things in the world, but it shouldn't take over, and it's in substitute that time with human connection that we all need.
And it's that thing, isn't it? It's human connection, and it's about being present in the moment and understanding how precious that is, and not kind of like rushing through it to get to the next thing that we know that we've got on our to-do list or whatever.
So what is then your one thing you want to have the audience take away from our conversation this evening? For me, it would be like that purposeful bit. Be purposeful with what you're doing, thinking about it. What's your one thing you want to say for the audience to go away and think about or to do in this world of AI, and especially having the student voice within it?
I think it would be, what do you want your relationship with AI to be? Because you can have all the guidance in the world, you can have all the guardrails in the world, you can listen to people like you and me and all the myriad of other people that are, trying to support everyone through this. But actually, only you can decide what you want your own relationship with AI to be, how you're going to engage with it or not. And I would say spend some time learning more about it, thinking more about it, using it, and actually deciding what that is going to look like for you. Because then if you are a teacher, that's going to support how you're guiding your students. If you're working in a school, that's going to support your wider understanding and everything else as well. But really think fundamentally yourself about your own attitude towards AI and what you want your relationship with it to be and to look like going forwards.
Thank you. And thank you, Emma, for what has been a fascinating conversation this evening. And thank you to all our guests. We've got 180 who are listening to us tonight across all the social media platforms. And thank you to our sponsors as well, Keelio and John Catt, who without them, this wouldn't be possible. I hope you have enjoyed this conversation about why student voice matters in the AI classroom and the Late Show with James Robin. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us on our social media channels and go to ttradio.org. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on the podcast, and use whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any of the others, please leave us a review and listen back. And once again, thank you, Emma, for what has been a great evening.
Thank you for having me.
And have a lovely Easter next week. I'm not going to be jealous at all.
I'm sure you mean that.
I do.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.